Right now, aid groups put the number of people on the brink of starvation in the Horn of Africa at more than 14 million. Nearly 40 million are at imminent risk of famine in West Africa this year. For them, there seems to be no moral dilemma, no hesitation when it comes to buying cheap grain from Russia, regardless of where it may have come from. Among African countries, the New York Times reports 60% of wheat in Rwanda, Tanzania and Senegal comes from Russia or Ukraine. That figure rises to 80% in Egypt. And Benin and Somalia, completely dependent on grain supplies from Russia and Ukraine. For many countries in Africa already feeling like an afterthought in this conflict between Russia, Ukraine and the West, there is no luxury or desire to debate the geopolitical ramifications of giving Vladimir Putin increased leverage to divide the global response to his war in Ukraine. The high moral ground means little when children are hungry. My next guest put it this way: Africans don't care where they get their food from, and if someone is going to moralise about that, they are mistaken. Khannenje is director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies. He joins us now live from Nairobi. So thank you for being with us. It seems like a fairly easy choice right now. Buy that stolen grain at a discounted price from Russia, or millions go hungry. But what is the US and Europe? What if they were offering an alternative? Same produce, same price, same amount. Would African nations back the West, or would there still be support from Moscow?
I think if there's going to be a solid, dependable alternative to the current food shortage, it is something that Africans are going to pay attention to. But I think to expect Africans to express solidarity, especially when it comes to Russia's actions in Ukraine, at the risk of starving themselves, is expecting a little bit too much. And so the choice is pretty, easy for many African countries, in part because much of their wheat needs actually are sourced from that conflict area. And so it's a challenge to the continent, but I think the choice is very clear.
And when I say there is no alternative being offered by the West, right?
Yeah, absolutely not, at least at the moment. And so thus far, in the absence of that, I think you're going to expect that African countries are still going to make efforts. But part of those efforts are actually to demonstrate its own agency with regard to the fate of the crisis in Ukraine.
Putin needs allies, Africa needs food, and the Russian president and the head of the African Union met last week in the Russian resort city of Sochi. Listen to this.
We
think that with Africa in general and its individual nations, we traditionally have good relations. I would even call them friendly relations, without exaggeration. Africa as a whole has huge potential, and based on that, we will continue to develop our relationships with Africa and its individual nations.
Many believe that Africa handed Putin a very significant win in terms of global influence and prestige. Are there concerns, though, that this could ultimately all go very badly for Africa by dragging out the war in Ukraine for longer and actually prolonging a food crisis?
Actually, absolutely not. I think Africans also are acutely aware of the geopolitical nature of the current conflict, but they also have historical ties with, of course, Russia, even though fundamentally most of the important ties are actually with the West. But I think they're finding themselves in a place that is not very comfortable, but also a place when it comes to choosing between the lives of the citizens as well as the international political moralism, they are going to choose their citizens over political morality.
According to the New York Times, when the United Nations voted on passing a resolution that condemned Russian aggression, 24 African countries abstained, 7 didn't vote at all, just 1, Eritrea, voted no. What does this tell you about Russian influence on the continent? Do you think some are looking at this as an opportunity to strengthen relations with the Kremlin, move away from the West?
Actually, I don't think that is exactly the choice. A lot of Africans' position, in part, was also informed by their fear that big powers should not be allowed to do what they want to do, because it's only international law that can actually protect smaller countries. But at the same time, I think there is a sentiment within the continent that much of the West has abandoned Africa in the march of the last 30 years. And therefore, being able to take sides in this conflict is not really going to help Africa in fundamental ways, considering the influence that China already has on the continent.
Explain just how serious this food crisis is right now across the continent. How bad is it? How bad is it going to get?
Actually, things could not have gotten any worse. Remember, this has compounded efforts to recover from the social dislocation and economic contraction caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this situation is only going not only to ensure that this recovery takes longer, but it can easily cause instability and fuel the kind of extremism that we are already seeing in certain parts of the continent, from the Horn of Africa as well as in West Africa.
Khannenje in Nairobi, thank you, sir, for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.